The rain came down cold on the day they nailed the notice to his own door. Jonah Ashcroft did not look up. He stood at his bench in the open front of his shop, turning a cartwheel on its hub, and he kept turning it. A man in a good coat drove a nail through a paper into the oak beside him. £14 of ground rent. 30 days, or the bailiffs came. The wheelwright wiped the rain from his eyes with the back of his wrist and set his thumb again to the fellow, feeling for the true. He did not argue. He did not know, that morning, that the estate pressing him into the mud was land his own dead father had owned. He did not know he was the master of it. Neither did they. Days later at the Aldacre market, before 24 neighbours, a young man reined his horse hard past the mud, splashed wheelwright, splashed him head to boot, and smiled. "Mind your betters, fellow," said Crispin Harlowe. "Harlowe land has no room for beggars." The crowd laughed. "Only you and I know the truth." The beggar was the elder Harlowe, the rightful one, and 200 miles south, in a great house with the curtains drawn, a dying man pressed a torn slip of paper into his younger son's hand. "Find the register at Ravensholt," he whispered. "Find the boy I was told died." Then his hand fell open. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have looked closer, this story is for you. Before we go on, subscribe and comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let me take you back to the beginning and tell it slow. The village was called Ravensholt-under-Fell, and it sat in a fold of the Cumberland hills where the wind came down off the high ground and rattled the slates all winter long. It was not a large place. A church, a green, a beck running under a stone bridge, a cluster of grey houses that had stood 200 years and meant to stand 200 more. And at the low end of the lane, where the beck ran nearest, stood the wheelwright's shop. Jonah Ashcroft had worked that shop for near 20 years. His mother had leased it before him. He was a big man, wide through the shoulders, with hands that had gone hard and sure at the trade before he was grown. He was not quick with words. He had never needed to be. A wheel is honest work, and it does not care whether the man who makes it can talk. It only asks that he can see true and cut true and set the iron tire so hot and so tight that the wood and the metal become one thing, and hold and roll for 30 years over stone roads without a groan. That was Jonah. He could look at a fellow and know it was a hair proud before ever he laid the straightage to it. He could hear a bad joint in a cart from across the green and tell you which wheel it lived in. Farmers came to him from 3 valleys over, because a wheel Jonah Ashcroft made did not fail you in the wet or the cold, and a man's harvest can turn on that. He asked little. A dry bed, work at his hands, and his mother's name kept clean. That last one mattered to him more than he would ever have said aloud. For Jonah had been raised without a father, under his mother's own surname, and in a small place that is a thing people remember. Eleanor Ashcroft had come to the village a young woman with a babe, and no ring on show, and no husband at her side, and the village had done what villages do. It had counted. It had whispered. It had decided. But it had also come, over the years, to a grudging respect for her, because Eleanor Ashcroft never once behaved like a woman with something to be ashamed of. She held her head level. She paid her debts to the penny. She raised her boy to be honest and to work, and when the old wheelwright grew too stiff for the trade, she took the lease of the shop and put her son to learn it, and she made sure he learned it right. She kept herself. She kept him. And whatever the whispers said, no one in Ravensholt could point to a single thing Eleanor Ashcroft had ever done that was not upright. She died the winter Jonah was 32. A fever took her in 3 days, quick and cruel, the way it takes the strong ones. He sat by her bed the whole of it. He held her hand when the shaking came, and he wiped her brow when it broke, and near the end. When she was clear again for a little while, the way the dying sometimes are, She looked at him, and she said a thing he had turned over in his mind 1,000 times since. "Your father," she said, "was a better man than the world let him be. That was all. He waited for more. He had waited his whole life for more. He had never once asked her his father's name, because he had seen what asking cost her in her face the 1 or 2 times he had come near it as a boy, and he loved her too well to make her pay it. And now, at the end, when he might have asked and she might have told, he could not do it. She was going. He would not spend her last strength on his own old wound. So she carried it out of the world with her. A better man than the world let him be. He did not know if it was truth or a mother's kindness. He let it be both. He buried her in the churchyard at St. Bede's, under a plain stone with her plain honest name on it, and he went back to the shop, and he worked. Because work was the one thing that did not ask him questions. Up in the loft over the shop there was a trunk. His mother's trunk. It was black oak bound in iron, and it had a good lock, and she had kept the key on a cord about her neck all the years he could remember. When she died, the key came to him with her few other things. He had never opened the trunk. He told himself there was no time, and then he told himself there was nothing in it but old cloth and older grief, and then he simply stopped telling himself anything and let it sit up there in the dark under the eaves, unopened since she passed. It gathered dust. He climbed past it to fetch seasoned oak, and he did not so much as brush the lid clean. Some doors a man does not open because he is afraid of what small thing might be behind them, and how much it might make him feel. That was the shape of Jonah Ashcroft's life, quiet, sufficient, his own. And then the estate began to tighten its screw. It started, as these things do, with paper. A new agent had come to the district, a man named Sowerby, sharp-faced and soft-handed, who worked for the great Harlowe family away south, and had been sent north to make their scattered northern holdings pay better. And Sowerby had a gift for finding money in a stone. He went about buying up the ground rents of Ravensholt, the small annual sums the villagers paid on the land their houses and shops stood on, sums so old and so small most had half forgotten they owed them. He bought them quietly, one after another, from the old families who had held them, and when he had them, he raised them. Jonah's ground rent had been £2 a year, time out of mind. The letter that came from Sowerby's office raised it to £14 on a wheelwright's shop in a village of 40 houses. It was not rent, it was a road out. A man could not pay it and eat, and Sowerby knew a man could not pay it and eat, and that was the whole of the point. Raise it past bearing, and when the tenant failed, take the shop, and sell the land under it to whoever would pay, or build on it, or simply be rid of the awkward small holders and their small old rights, and make the map clean. Jonah wrote to the office plainly and civilly, and asked for reason. The answer came back cold as slate. The rent was set. Payment was due at the quarter. Non-payment would be met with distraint of goods and eviction under the law. 30 days' notice given. There would be no discussion. He read it twice. He folded it. He put it in the drawer where he kept the accounts, and he went back to the wheel on the bench, because there was nothing else to be done, and the wheel at least would come true under his hands. That is the first thing you must hold in your mind. A good man, a skilled man, an honest man, being ground down slowly by a power he could not see the face of, for money he did not have, off land he had every earthly right to stand on, and none of them, not the agent, not the family, not Jonah himself, had the faintest idea who he was. Now let us go south, to the great house, where a different sort of man was dying. Wethermore Hall stood in the North Riding of Yorkshire, near the market town of Alderker, in a park of 500 acres, with a lake and an avenue of limes 100 years old. It was the seat of the Harlowe baronets, and it had been for 6 generations. £9,000 a year came out of the estate and its rents, and the whole of it, land and house and title and income, was gathered in the person of one old man who now lay dying in the great bedchamber with the fire built up and the physician sent away, because there was nothing left for a physician to do. Sir Ambrose Harlowe was 80 years old, and for 40 of those years he had been, by every account the county could give, the perfect man, the perfect squire, the perfect family man. He was just to his tenants. He was open-handed to the church and the poor. He sat as magistrate and was known for tempering the law with mercy. He had raised 2 sons and buried a wife, and never once, in 4 decades, given the county the smallest thing to say against him. When people in the North Riding wanted to describe a good landlord, they said, like Sir Ambrose, his name was a byword for decency. His life was held up as a thing to copy. His younger son sat beside the bed. This was Edmund Harlowe, 8 and 20, a grave, gentle, careful young man who had none of his elder brother's fire and all of his father's better nature. Edmund had been sent for 3 days since, and he had not left the room but to sleep an hour at a time in the chair. He held his father's hand now, the great veined hand gone light as a bird, and he watched the old man drift and surface and drift. Toward evening Sir Ambrose came clear. His eyes opened and found his son, and there was a thing in them Edmund had never seen in his father before. Not fear. Sir Ambrose had never feared much. It was more like a man at the foot of a mountain he had carried for so long he had forgotten it was there, and now, at the end, must at last set down. "Edmund," he said, "send them out. All of them. I must speak to you alone." There was a nurse by the door and a manservant by the fire. Edmund sent them both away. When the door had closed he leaned near, and his father's hand tightened on his with a strength that had no business in a body so far gone. "I have been," said Sir Ambrose, "a liar for 40 years, and they have called me a good man for it. That is the joke of it, boy. They called me good. Father, be still. Listen. I have not the wind to say it twice." He gathered himself, the fire ticked. "Before I was Sir Ambrose, before your grandfather died and I came into all this, I was a younger son and poor, with nothing but my name, and I went north to Cumberland to see about some small holdings of ours. And there I met a girl. Edmund said nothing. He had gone very still. Her name was Eleanor Ashcroft. She was a curate's daughter, poor as I was, and good. Edmund, she was good all the way through, the way almost nobody is. I loved her, not the way you love when you are young and it burns and passes. The other way, the way that does not pass. The old man's eyes were wet and open and looking at something 40 years off. I married her. Do you hear me? I married her, truly and lawfully, in the parish church of St. Bede, at Ravensholt-under-Fell, in the spring of 1838. There was a minister and a register and a ring. She was my wife before God and the law, my first wife, my true wife. The room seemed to Edmund to have gone entirely silent, as though the house itself were leaning in. "My family," said Sir Ambrose, and now his voice went hard and bitter, "found out. My father. My stepmother, chiefly, she ran the family as your grandmother never had the strength to. A curate's daughter, penniless, married in secret to the heir's brother. To them it was a ruin, a scandal, a thing to be got rid of. And they got rid of it. They drove her out. They told me lies, and they told her lies, and they set 200 miles and a wall of money between us. I was young, and I was weak, and I let them do it. God forgive me. I let them. I went abroad because they sent me abroad, and while I was gone they wrote to me that she had died. A fever, they said. She and the child both. Mother and infant, dead of a fever in Cumberland. The child, Edmund said. It was the first word he had managed. She was carrying when they parted us. When the letter came saying she had died, it said the child had died with her. The old man's breath came ragged now. I believed it, or I made myself believe it, which is worse. It was easier to grieve them dead than to fight my family for them living. So I grieved. I came home. My brother died, and then my father, and the whole of it fell on me. The estate and the title, and there was Lady Vane, my stepmother, still at my elbow, and there was the county, and there was a suitable marriage made for me, your mother, boy, and I did come to love her. That at least was not a lie. And I built 40 years on top of the grave of the two people I had loved best and let die. 40 years of being called good. He stopped. His chest worked. Edmund reached for the cup of water, but his father shook his head, one small, fierce refusal. No time. Edmund, here is why I have told you and not carried it into the dark like the coward I have been. In these last weeks, a man thinks when he is dying. And I have thought. And I have never once, in the deep of my own heart, in 40 years truly believed she died. I do not know how to tell you this, and have you not think it the raving of an old sick man. But I knew her. I knew how strong she was, and there was always a thing in me that said, they lied. They lied about everything else. Why not this? Why not the last cruel thing? What if the fever was a story too? What if she lived? What if the child lived? From beneath the pillow, with a hand that shook, he drew out a scrap of paper, torn small, folded and refolded until the creases were soft as cloth. He pressed it into Edmund's palm and closed the boy's fingers over it with both his hands. The register, he said. St. Bede's, Ravensholt, 1838. Our marriage is written there, in the book, in the minister's own hand, that they could never reach, 200 miles off, a thing of the church. And if the child lived, the christening will be there too, the week after. Find the register, Edmund, find the boy I was told died. If he lives, he is my firstborn. Do you understand what I am telling you? He is my heir. Before Crispin, before all of it, my true heir, and he has spent his whole life a poor man's son under a shame that was never his, while the son who insulted, he broke off, coughing. Edmund held him. When it passed, the old man was smaller, greyer, further away. Promise me, Sir Ambrose whispered, not for the estate, to the devil with the estate. Promise me you will find him. And tell him his mother was a wife, and he was born in wedlock, and his name was never a shame. Promise me his name is cleared. That is all I want. That is the only good thing I have left it in me to do, and I have left it 40 years too late. I promise, said Edmund. Father, I promise you. Sir Ambrose looked at him a long moment. Something in the old face eased. You were always, he said, the best of us. And his eyes drifted, and the fire ticked, and after a while the great veined hand went slack in his son's, and the perfect squire, the perfect family man, the county's byword for a good life, went out of the world at last with the truth of it spoken into the ears of one honest boy and no one else alive. Edmund sat in the dark, and did not ring the bell. He held the torn scrap of paper in his fist, and he could not have said for a long time whether the thing that filled him was grief or wonder or dread. Somewhere in the house, he knew, his brother slept, and his father's widow slept, and none of them yet knew that the ground had moved. He opened his hand and looked at the scrap in the firelight. There was writing on it, half a line in a faded old ink, cut clean across as if a knife or a pair of scissors had taken it from something larger. He could make out only a few words. A place, a year, and part of a name. He did not sleep at all that night. Now hold that. Hold the boy sitting in the dark with the paper in his hand and his father cooling beside him and a promise on his soul, because while grief kept Edmund still, the world went on grinding the very man he had sworn to find, and the loudest, cruelest turn of it was about to happen in front of 24 people who would never know what they were looking at. It was market day at Aldecott. Now you might think Aldecott is in Yorkshire, near the Hall, and so it is, but do not be confused. There was an Aldecott market and a Cumberland market both, and it was to the nearer one, the great cattle and goods market that drew the whole district, that Jonah Ashcroft had brought a load of finished wheels to sell. He needed the money. He needed it badly, with £14 hanging over him and 30 days running out. He had loaded 4 good wheels and a set of cart shafts onto a borrowed dray and driven the miles in before dawn and set up his small pitch at the edge of the market square, and by the middle of the morning he had sold 2 wheels to a carrier and was haggling, patient and unhurried, over the third. The square was full, farmers and drovers and their wives, stalls of cloth and cheese and iron, the noise and smell and press of a market at its height. 24 people at least stood within easy sight and hearing of Jonah's pitch, folk of the district, some who knew him, most who did not. And into this came Crispin Harlowe on a fine grey horse. Crispin was Sir Ambrose's elder living son, the heir presumptive, a young man of 25 who had been raised his whole life in the certainty that the estate and the 9,000 a year and the baronetcy would one day be his, and who had never in that life been told no by anyone who mattered. He was handsome in a hard way, and he sat his horse well, and he was, at that hour, in the foulest of tempers, though the market did not know why. Word had reached him that his father was failing at last, and rather than ride to the deathbed he had ridden out, he was that kind of man, to be away from the house and the waiting. He came through the market at a walk that was almost a shove, expecting the crowd to part, and the crowd, being poor and being wise, parted. But a market is crowded, and a dray is a big thing, and Jonah's pitch stood where it stood. Crispin's grey came up short against the press of people by the wheelwright's stall, and Crispin, impatient, reined it round hard, and the horse's hooves came down in a churn of black mud at the edge of the square and threw it up in a sheet. It caught Jonah full, down his front, across his face, into his eyes. He had been bent over the third wheel, and he came up slow, blinking the filth away, a big mud-streaked man with his hands out from his sides. He did not curse. He did not raise a fist. He looked up at the young man on the fine horse, and there was nothing in his face but a kind of tired patience. And he said, "Mild as you like. Have a care, sir. There's folk afoot here." And Crispin Harlowe looked down at him. He looked down at the big shabby wheelwright with the mud on him and the mended coat and the worn boots, and something in the sight of a working man daring to speak to him lit the whole of his black temper like a match to tow. He gathered the reins. He raised his voice so that it carried across the square. Because a man like Crispin does not insult you for your sake, he insults you for the crowd. "Mind your betters, fellow," he said. "Harlowe land has no room for beggars." And the market laughed. Not all of it, but enough to matter. Enough that the sound of it went round the square, the easy, cruel laughter of a crowd that will always laugh at the poor man mocked by the rich one, because it is safer to laugh with the horse than to stand with the mud. Someone jeered, someone called out. Crispin, satisfied, gave his grey the heel and rode on through, and the crowd closed behind him, and the moment passed as such moments do, and was forgotten by everyone in that square by the time they sat to their suppers. Everyone but the man it was aimed at, who stood a long moment with the mud drying on his face and said nothing at all, and then bent, without a word, back to the wheel. Now you and I, watching, know the thing the whole of that laughing market did not, that the young lord on the fine horse and the mud-streaked wheelwright at the stall were brothers, that the wheelwright was the elder, that every acre of Harlowe land that had no room for beggars was, in the eye of God and the law, the wheelwright's before it was the boy's, that the beggar was the master, and the master was the beggar, and the crowd had jeered the rightful lord of them all, and gone home pleased with itself. Hold that in you. Let it sit and burn a little, the way it deserves. because that is the debt the rest of this story exists to pay. 24 people laughed at Jonah Ashcroft in the Aldacca market, and one honest boy, 200 miles and a few days away, had just sworn on his dying father's hand to find him. Edmund did not tell his family what he knew. That was the first hard decision, and he made it in the grey hours after his father died, sitting in the study with the torn scrap of paper on the desk before him and his brother's step in the hall overhead. He thought about laying it before them. He thought about the honest, open thing, gathering the family and reading out what their father had said, and he understood, the way you understand a cold draught before you find the open window, that it would be the surest way to bury the truth forever. He did not yet know the whole of what his stepmother had done. But he had grown up in that house, and he knew Lady Vane, and he knew that a secret of this size, laid before the people it would ruin, would not survive the day. Papers went missing in houses like Weathermore. Witnesses were paid or frightened. He had one scrap of a torn page and a dead man's word, and against it the whole weight of 9,000 a year. So he said nothing. He buried his father with the county looking on and calling the old man good, and he stood at the graveside beside his brother Crispin, who wept the correct amount and was all ready. Edmund could see, mentally arranging his inheritance. He stood beside his stepmother Lady Vane, 66 years old and straight as a rod in her black, dry-eyed, watchful. A woman who missed nothing. And through all of it, Edmund kept his own counsel and grieved his father truly and waited. Then, quietly, on the excuse of estate business in the north, he went to Cumberland. He went alone, and he told no one his real errand, and after 3 days of hard travel by coach and hired horse, he came at last into the hills, and down into the fold of them, and over a stone bridge above a running beck, into a small grey village at the low end of the world. Ravensholt-under-Fell. He had never seen it. His father had spoken its name once, dying, and here it was, real, with smoke from its chimneys and a dog barking somewhere, and the church tower grey against the grey sky. Bede stood at the top of the village. He went to it first, before he found a bed, before he ate, because he could not bear to wait. The church was old and small and cold, and smelled of stone and lamp oil. The curate was a young man, thin and nervous, newly come to the living. Edmund gave a half-truth, that he was tracing a marriage in the parish, family business, a matter of a will, and asked to see the register for the year 1838. The curate hesitated. Something crossed his face. But he had no good reason to refuse, and so he fetched the great parish book, the register of marriages and christenings and burials going back generations, and laid it on the vestry table and turned the heavy pages to the year. And Edmund's heart, which had climbed the whole long way north on a scrap of hope, fell down through the cold stone floor. The page was gone, not defaced, not blotted. Gone, cut clean out of the binding with a sharp blade, so cleanly that the 2 leaves on either side of the year 1838 lay flat against each other, as if the missing page had never been. A thin stub of paper, close in against the spine, was all that remained of it. The whole of that year's marriages, and the whole of that year's christenings, because the seasons ran together on the leaf, simply excised. Taken, Edmund stared at it. He put his finger to the cut edge. It was old. It had been done a very long time ago. There was, the curate began, and stopped, and Edmund looked up at him, and the young man coloured and looked at the floor and said, in the voice of a man repeating something he has been told to say, there was water damage. Some years back, before my time, some of the old pages were spoiled and had to be removed, I was told, if anyone asked, to say it was water damage. Told by whom? Said Edmund, very quietly. The curate would not answer that. He gathered the book to his chest as if to protect it, or himself, and said the vicar was away, and the light was going, and perhaps the gentleman might come again. And Edmund, who could see the fear on him and knew it would give nothing more today, thanked him and let him go, and walked out of the cold church into the colder evening with the ground gone out from under everything. 40 years too late, his father had said. And here was the proof of it. They had been thorough. Whoever had buried Eleanor Ashcroft and her child in lies had reached 200 miles north into a country church and cut the truth out of the book with a knife long ago, and told the priests to say water damage. The one hard record his father had staked everything on was gone, and had been gone for decades, and there was nothing left to find. He stood in the churchyard among the leaning stones as the light failed. He did not know it, but he was standing not 30 feet from a plain grave with the name Eleanor Ashcroft cut into it, and he walked past it in the dusk without a glance, because a name meant nothing to him yet. He felt the whole errand collapse. A dead man's dream. A torn scrap. A cut page. He had promised, and he could not keep the promise, because they had made sure all those years ago that it could never be kept. And then, from the shadow of the church porch, a voice spoke. They cut the paper, it said. Edmund turned. An old woman sat on the stone bench within the porch, out of the wind, so still and so wrapped in grey that he had walked right past her without seeing her at all. She was very old. Her face was a knot of lines, and her hands were folded on a stick, and her eyes, when they caught the last of the light, were bright and black and steady, and they were fixed on him with a knowing that stopped him where he stood. They cut the paper, the old woman said again. And then, slow, each word set down like a stone, they could not cut the memory. Edmund's heart, which had lain down and died in the cold church, moved once in his chest. "Who are you?" he said. The old woman did not answer that yet. She looked at him a while longer, taking his measure, this grave grief-worn young gentleman come 200 miles to a church and gone white as ash over a missing page. And then she said a thing that took the last of the breath out of him. "You've his look about the brow," she said. The younger one had it too. Ambrose Harlowe's look. I wondered how long it would be. 40 years, and here's a Harlowe on the porch at St. Bede's, white as death over 1838. She patted the stone bench beside her with one old hand. "Sit down, boy. Sit down out of the wind. My legs are done and my eyes are near, but my head is clear as it ever was, and there is a thing I have carried the whole of my life, waiting for someone to come and ask me. Sit down, and I will tell you what was on the page they cut." She began with the wedding. It was spring, she said, 1838. A cold spring, the way they come up here, with the blackthorn still bare. I was a younger woman then, not young. But my hands were sure, and my eyes were good, and I had brought half the children in Ravensholt into the world, and I had laid out half the old ones. That is the trade. You see them in, and you see them out. Edmund sat. The wind pulled at the porch and the light was going, and he did not feel it. He watched her mouth. There was a young man come to the village that year, she said. Not a lord, not then. A younger son with no money and no land, working under the surveyor who was drawing the fell roads. Ambrose, he was called, a tall lad with that same brow you carry, boy, and the same still way of looking at a thing. And there was Eleanor Ashcroft, a wheelwright's daughter. Her father made the carts for 3 parishes, and she had his good sense in her, and she was the handsomest thing in the dale, though I'll not say she was proud of it, for she wasn't. They married, Edmund said. It was not a question. He had to hear it said. They married, said Widow Bree, at that altar, 30 feet from where you stood white as a sheet. The curate that had the living then was old Mr. Feltham, and he read them over honest and true, and I stood witness with the sexton's wife, and there was no shame in it and no hiding in it, not then. They signed the book. I saw the young man write his name, Ambrose Harlowe, and I saw her write hers, Eleanor Ashcroft, and under it the curate wrote the day and the year. Her old finger came up and pointed, slow, toward the dark bulk of the church. That is what was on the page they cut. A true marriage, in a true hand, with true witnesses. 1838. Edmund closed his eyes. His father's voice came back to him, thin off the pillow, 200 miles south. I married her true, before God and the book. And they told me she died. There was a ring, the old woman went on. He had no money, that young man, but he'd had his mother's ring off her before she passed, and inside it there was words cut. The old words, the Harlowe words. I held her hand when the pains came, and I saw it on her finger, and I read it, for I could read a little, which was rare in a woman then. Truth is the harder road. That was the cutting inside the gold. I have carried those words the whole of my life. Truth is the harder road. Something moved in Edmund's chest, sharp and cold and living. The child, he said. A boy, said Widow Bree. I had him into the world myself, in the low room over her father's shop, on a wild night in the autumn of that same year, a great, strong, squalling boy with a shock of dark hair, and she wept over him the way women weep, who are frightened and glad at once. And we christened him that same week, here, at this font, before the family down south ever knew a child was coming. Christened him honest, in the book, a lawful son. His name, Edmund said. His voice had gone to nothing. The old woman looked at him a long moment, and she said it. Ashcroft, she said. They christened him by her name, for the young man was already gone by then, sent for by his people, and she would not put the Harlowe name on the boy when the Harlowes had shut their door. She was proud that way, honest and proud. She kept her own name, and she gave it to her son, and she said to me, I mind it still, she said, Bree, they may have the name, they shall not have the boy. And she raised him herself, alone, and never a word of complaint out of her in 40 years. Edmund sat very still. The dusk had come down cold and blue around the porch, and out beyond it the churchyard lay grey, and 30 feet off, plain against the dark grass, stood a low stone he had passed without knowing it. She's buried here, he said. Yonder, said the old woman. The plain stone. Eleanor Ashcroft. She went 4 years since, in the spring, an old woman quiet in her bed, and I laid her out with these 2 hands the way I'd laid out her own mother, and I stood at the grave and I thought, now it's ended. Now there's none left knows but me, and I'm old, and it'll go into the ground with me, and that will be the last of it. She turned those black bright eyes on him, and now here you sit, 40 years, boy, and a Harlowe on the porch at last, come asking. The son, Edmund said. Eleanor's son. Is he living? Said Widow Bree. Aye, living and well, and not a mile from where we sit. The cold went through Edmund like water. Living, not a shade, not a name in a torn book. A man, breathing, a mile off, in this same failing light. They told my father the child died, he said, the child and the mother both. Fever, they told him. He believed it 40 years. It broke him, and he believed it. Then someone lied to your father, said the old woman, and her voice went hard as the stone she sat on. For no child died in this parish that autumn but the miller's girl, and that of the croup, and I laid her out too. Eleanor's boy never had so much as a bad winter. Somebody told your father a lie, and somebody cut that page, and boy, she leaned toward him. And her folded hands tightened on the stick. A page is not cut by water. Water browns it. Water rots it soft. That page was taken out clean, with a blade, close to the binding, by a hand that knew exactly which year it wanted gone. That was no accident. That was never an accident. Somebody paid, and somebody cut, and somebody told the curate to say water, and it has stood for 40 years because there was none left with the wit and the standing to ask. Edmund understood then, all at once, the shape of the thing. It had not been misfortune. It had been done. Sat in a room somewhere, decided, and carried out with a knife and a lie and a long patience. And he thought of the house he had come from, and the still dry-eyed woman who ruled it. And he felt sick. "Where is he?" Edmund said. "The son." "Tell me where." "You'll not go tonight," said Widow Bree. "You're grey to the lips, and you've the road in your bones. You'll go in the morning, and you'll go gentle, for the man knows nothing. He does not know his father was a lord. He does not know there was a marriage. He believes—" She paused. "I fear he believes his birth was a shame to be born quiet. His mother never told him different, God rest her, for she thought it kinder. So you'll go gentle, boy then, dry as a bone, though you'll not have far to look." Half the Dale was talking of him a week gone. The wheelwright. The one young Harlowe cursed for a beggar at Aldacca in front of 24 folk, and never knew he was cursing his own blood. And Edmund, who had heard that story on the road north and thought nothing of it, felt the whole world tilt and settle new. The wheelwright. Jonah Ashcroft. His brother. In the grey of the next morning Edmund came down the village street with his heart going hard, and he found the shop by the notice nailed to its door. He stood and read it in the wet light. Distraint, £14 of ground rent owing. 30 days. And below it the name of the agent that had signed it. Sowerby, and Edmund knew that name, for it was a Harlowe name, a name off his own family's papers, and the shame of it burned in him. The true master of Weathermore, taxed out of a shed by his own estate's man, and none of them knowing what they did. The shop door stood open. Inside a man was working. He was near 20 years old, broad through the shoulder, dark-haired going a little grey at the temple, and he was turning a great cartwheel on its hub, with his sleeves back and his forearms corded, setting a fellow true with small sure taps of a mallet. He did not look up at once. He finished the stroke he was on. Then he set the mallet down and turned, and Edmund saw his face full, and the breath stopped in him, for it was his father's face. Older, plainer, weathered by work and weather, but the brow was the brow, and the still measuring look was the same look, and Edmund had watched it fade off a pillow 4 days since. "You'll be wanting a wheel," the man said, "or a repair." "I do both, though I'll tell you honest, sir, I may not be here to finish it. They've a notice on my door." "I saw it," Edmund said. The wheelwright looked at him a moment, the fine coat, the road mud on it, the grey face of a man who had not slept. "You've come away," he said. "You're wet through and you're near dropping. Whatever your business, it'll keep till you've dried. Come in to the fire. I'll not have a man fall down in my yard for the want of a chair." And that, more than anything the old woman had said, went into Edmund like a blade. The man owed the Harlowes nothing. The Harlowes had raised his rent and nailed his door and cursed him for a beggar in the open market, and he took a wet stranger to his fire without a question, because the stranger was wet and grey and needed it. Edmund thought, he does not know he is the better man in this dale by a mile, and he never once suspects it. He sat by the small fire and could not speak for a while. Jonah Ashcroft gave him bread and a cup of something hot, and did not press him, and worked on quietly, and let a stranger gather himself. At last Edmund set the cup down. "My name is Edmund Harlowe," he said. The mallet stopped. Jonah turned. There was no anger in his face, only a kind of tired guarding. "Then you've come about the rent," he said. "You may tell your Mr. Sowerby I have not got £14, and I am not like to find it. I have paid £2 a year on this ground for 20 years without a day's lateness, and now it is 14, and there's no wheelwright living could pay it. So there's my answer. You'll have the shop, I expect, in the end, but you'll not have it a day before the 30 is up, for I'll work every one of them." "I have not come about the rent," Edmund said. "I have come to find you. I have come 200 miles to find you, and I do not rightly know how to say the thing I have to say, so I will say it plain, and you may think me mad." He drew breath. My father was Sir Ambrose Harlowe of Weathermore. He died 4 days ago, and in his last hours he told me a thing he had carried 40 years. As a young man, before he came into anything, he married a woman here in Ravensholt. He married her true, at St. Bede's, in the spring of 1838. Her name was Jonah Ashcroft. The wheelwright had gone very still. "That was my mother's name," Jonah said. "Lo, there was a child," Edmund said, "a son, born that autumn, christened lawful in the same church." My father was told the mother and the child died of fever. He believed it his whole life, and it grieved him to his grave. But they did not die. The page that held the marriage has been cut from the register. But there is a woman living, the midwife, who stood witness at the wedding and brought the boy into the world with her own hands. She told me his name last night, in the church porch. Edmund looked at him. She told me it was Ashcroft. She told me he lives a mile off, and mends wheels, and was called a beggar in Aldicott Market by a man that never guessed what he was insulting. The fire ticked. Outside a cart went by on the wet road. Jonah Ashcroft stood with the mallet loose in his hand, and his face had gone the colour of ash, and Edmund watched 40 years of a quiet man's understanding of himself come apart in the space of a breath. "You're telling me," Jonah said, and stopped. He wet his lips. "You're telling me my mother was a lord's wife." And he could not finish it. "I am telling you," Edmund said gently, "that you are my brother, my elder brother, born in wedlock before any of us. And by every law of the land, everything my family holds, the hall, the land, the £9,000 a year, the very title, was never Crispin's, and was never mine. It is yours. It has been yours the whole of your life, while they raised your rent and let you stand in the mud." Jonah Ashcroft did not shout. He did not weep. He set the mallet down on the bench, slow and careful, the way a man sets down a thing when his hands are no longer to be trusted. And he stood looking into the small fire a long while, and when he spoke it was not of the title, nor the land, nor the £9,000. "She used to say," he said, "when I was a boy, and asked about my father. And the other lads had fathers and I had none. She used to say, 'Your father was a better man than the world let him be.' And I thought it was a thing mothers say, to spare a child the shame." He shut his eyes. "She knew. All those years she knew, and she never told me, and she carried it into the ground rather than shame him or me." "She kept her name honest," Edmund said. "The old woman told me. She said your mother would not put the Harlowe name on you when the Harlowes had shut their door, but she would not slander it either. She raised you clean and said nothing. 40 years. For a while neither man spoke. Then Jonah Ashcroft did the thing that made him, in the end, the heir he was, not because it was clever, for it was not clever, and not because it was safe, for it was the least safe thing he could have done, but because a man asked him for the truth, and he had it in his house. "There's a trunk," he said quietly, in the loft. "My mother's, bound in iron. It came to me when she died, and I never had the heart to open it. There's a key came with her things, on a cord. I've kept it 4 years, and never used it." He looked at Edmund. "If there's anything of hers to find, it'll be there. I'll fetch it down." He climbed the loft ladder. Edmund heard him moving in the dark above, and heard the scrape of iron, and the man came down slow with a black oak trunk in his arms, and set it on the bench, and took a small key on a worn cord from about his own neck. He fitted it to the lock. His hand was not steady. The lock gave. Inside there was linen, folded and yellowed, and under it a child's things kept these 40 years, a little cap, a wooden horse worn smooth. Jonah's jaw worked at the sight of them, and under those, wrapped in a square of black silk, 2 things, a ring and a folded paper. Jonah unwrapped the ring first. It was old gold, worn thin, and he turned it to the firelight and read the cutting inside the band aloud, slow, a working man reading small letters. "Truth is the harder road," he said. "The Harlowe words," said Edmund, and his voice shook. "They are cut inside every ring my family has worn for 6 generations. The midwife told me them last night before ever I saw this, word for word." And Jonah unfolded the paper. It was a copy of the marriage lines, written out fair in an old, careful hand, kept these 4 decades folded in black silk, Eleanor's own kept copy, the thing a proud woman keeps though she never means to use it. The names stood plain. Ambrose Harlowe, Eleanor Ashcroft, St. Bede's, Ravensholt, the 11th of April, 1838. Jonah Ashcroft held the ring in one hand and the lines in the other, and he stood a long moment. He could have folded them back into the silk. He could have shut the iron trunk and said, "Take your title, I want none of it. Leave me my 30 days and my bench." No one would ever have known. He would have stayed safe and small and unseen. He held them out to Edmund instead. "Take them," he said. "If they're true, they're not mine to hide. My mother kept them honest all those years. I'll not shame her now by putting them back in the dark." And Edmund took his mother's ring and his mother's marriage from his brother's open hand, and knew that the thing was begun and could not now be stopped. The family solicitor was a Mr. Pettigrew, a careful, decent, unhappy man who had served the Harlowes 30 years and did not like the smell of this at all. Edmund laid it before him whole, the deathbed confession, the cut page, the midwife's word, the ring, the marriage lines. Pettigrew turned the ring over and over in his dry fingers and shook his head. "It is a grave thing, Mr. Edmund," he said, "a very grave thing. A marriage claimed with the register page gone is no marriage a court will hear of. A ring may be argued theft. A copy of the lines, kept in a trunk, may be argued forgery. The midwife is a woman of 90 with no letters. I do not doubt you, sir. I say what they will say. The proof is not enough. The page is gone, and the page was the proof, and the page is gone." "The page is not the only copy," Edmund said slowly. He had been thinking, in the cold hours on the road, of a thing he half remembered from a dull afternoon of his boyhood, a clergyman droning of parish law. "Mr. Pettigrew, is it not the law, the old law, that every parish sends a copy of its register up to the cathedral every year? A transcript, into the bishop's keeping." Pettigrew went still. His dry face changed. "The bishop's transcript," he said softly. "Good God. Yes, yes, every incumbent by canon, every year a fair copy of the year's marriages and christenings and burials sent up to the diocesan registry. It is the law and has been the law past 200 years. He was on his feet now. Ravensholt is in the Diocese of Carlisle. If the incumbent sent his transcript up in 1839 as the law bound him, and if no hand reached into the cathedral archive as it reached into the parish book, then the marriage is written twice," Edmund said. "And they only cut it once." They took the road to Carlisle, the two of them, 3 days of hard travel over the fell in the wet. And in a cold high room of the diocesan registry, a clerk brought down the great bound transcripts of the parish of St. Bede, and the diocesan registrar, a spectacled, precise old gentleman with no interest in the Harlowes at all, ran his finger down the fair copy sent up in the spring of 1839, and stopped. "Here," he said, "marriages, 1838, the 11th of April. Ambrose Harlowe, bachelor, and Eleanor Ashcroft, spinster, both of this parish. Witnessed. And here, below, christenings, the same year, autumn, a son, to Eleanor Ashcroft, both in the incumbent's own hand, sent up under his own seal, and untouched since the day it was bound." He looked at them over his spectacles. "I do not know what your parish book says, gentlemen, But this book has lain in this archive 40 years, and no one has opened it in your lifetime, and it says what it says." Pettigrew let out a long breath, and there was something in his tired face that Edmund had not seen there before. Relief. The relief of an honest man who has feared he must watch a fraud win, and finds he need not. What one hand tore out, Pettigrew said quietly, another had already copied. By law. Every year. Into the book at Carlisle. He shut the great transcript with care. "It is beyond them now, Miss Edmund. It is beyond all of us. The proof is in the cathedral's keeping, and no Harlowe hand can reach it. Your brother is the heir, and it can be shown, and there is an end." But it was not the end. Because word travels, and word reached Weathermore before they were home, and the woman who had done the thing 40 years since was not a woman to sit still. Lady Vane Harlowe was 66 years old and had ruled the hall from behind 3 men in her time. She heard the whole of it dry-eyed, as she heard everything, and she did not waste an hour on grief or on shock. She moved. The ring, she said, was theft. Some village woman had come by a Harlowe heirloom by God knew what dishonest means, and the trunk and the papers with it, and it should be answered as theft. She sent word to Sowerby to have the distraint on the Ravensholt shop brought forward. No waiting out the 30 days now. But the tools seized and the door barred at once, the impostor wheelwright scattered from the dale before he could stand up in any court and make his face known. And she wrote to Pettigrew, cold and smooth, of his 30 years' service and his comfortable old age, and how sad it would be if certain documents, being of doubtful provenance, were to go astray, as documents did, in the course of a long dispute. And Crispin Harlowe, 25 and furious, the 9,000 a year he had thought his own snatched sideways out of his hands by a peasant with a mallet, did not write anything at all. He got on his horse and rode to Ravensholt to look the impostor in the eye. He came into the yard where Jonah stood among his half-finished wheels, and he did not get down. He looked at the wheelwright from the height of the saddle, the way he had looked at him in the market, and he said the thing again, not knowing he was saying it now, to his lawful elder brother, the true baronet of Weathermore. "So this is the beggar that would be a baronet," Crispin said. "I said it to your face at Aldeca, and I'll say it again. Harlowe land has no room for beggars, and no dead woman's lies will make one of you. You've been put up to this by my brother, who was always a fool, and by some grubbing lawyer. But you'll be off this ground by the week's end with your barrow and your tools, and there'll be no more heard of it. Mind your betters, fellow, you never had any others." And Jonah Ashcroft looked up at him a long moment. He might have told him then. "Brother," he might have said. He said nothing of the kind. He wiped his hands on his apron, slow, and he answered in the plain voice he answered everyone. "I've minded my betters the whole of my life," Jonah said. "I'm only now finding out how few of them there were." And he turned back to his wheel. Crispin flushed red and jerked the horse's head round and rode off, and did not understand, and would not until he stood in his own father's library and heard it read. They came for the shop 2 days after. Sowerby's men, 4 of them, with the paper. They took Jonah's tools off the walls and out of the racks, the augers and the travellers and the great fellow saw his grandfather had owned, and they carried them out into the yard and loaded them, and they nailed a bar across the door of the shop he had worked in for 20 years. Jonah stood and watched it done and did not lift a hand, because there was nothing his hands could do against a paper, and he knew it. Pettigrew, threatened off the case, did not go. That was the measure of the man. He wrote to Edmund one line, "They have offered me my peace and my pension to let it fall, and I find at my age I would rather keep my name than my peace," and he stayed. And Edmund, who had learned in a hard fortnight exactly how far his own blood would go to bury a truth, did the one thing that put it past them for good. He did not keep the transcript, and the ring and the marriage lines and Widow Bree's sworn statement taken down before a magistrate in any Harlowe house or any Harlowe hand. He carried them himself to the county authority and lodged them there, entire, under seal, where neither his stepmother's money nor his brother's temper could reach them. Let them dispute it now, he thought. Let them dispute it in the open, before the county, with the proof already in the court's own keeping. He had learned the lesson 40 years too late for his father, and just in time for his brother. They heard the contest in the library at Wethermore Hall before the county magistrate, with the family and the gentry of 2 ridings gathered in to see it. It was a long room, and cold for all its fires, and Jonah Ashcroft stood at the back of it in his one good coat, a wheelwright among lords, and said not a word. The diocesan registrar had come south with his great bound transcript, and he was called first. He set the book on the long table and opened it to the place he had marked, and he read out into the silent room, precise and unhurried, an old man reading a record. Marriages in the parish of St. Bede, Ravensholt, in the diocese of Carlisle. In the year of our Lord 1838, he read, the 11th day of April, Ambrose Harlowe, bachelor, and Eleanor Ashcroft, spinster, married in this church by banns, by me, the incumbent, in the presence of these witnesses. He turned a leaf. And christenings, the same parish, the same year. A son, lawfully born, to the said Eleanor, wife of the said Ambrose Harlowe. He looked up and closed the book, and the sound of it was very loud. This copy was sent to the cathedral under the incumbent's seal in the spring of 1839, as the canon requires, and has lain in the diocesan archive untouched from that day to this. I will swear to it on any oath the court cares to name. The room did not breathe. Then Widow Bree was brought in. She had made the journey south in a hired chaise, all her 90-odd years of her, wrapped in grey, and she was helped to a chair by the table, and the ring was laid before her on a square of black cloth. She took it up in her old fingers and turned it to the light, and did not hesitate. I held the hand this went on, she said, at that altar, 1838, and I read the words inside it when the birth pains came in the autumn, for I could read a little and few women could. Truth is the harder road. That is the cutting, and there it is, and this is the ring that Eleanor Ashcroft was wed in, and no other. She set it down. I brought her son into the world with these 2 hands, and I christened him the same week. And he stands yonder at the back of your grand room in his working coat, and he has his father's brow, and any of you with eyes may see it. And every head in the room turned, all together, to look at the wheelwright at the back. Jonah Ashcroft stood and bore it, and said nothing. Beside the ring, upon the table, Edmund laid the marriage lines his brother had kept in the iron trunk, and beside those, last, Pettigrew laid a thing that changed the colour of Lady Vane Harlowe's face. For among Sir Ambrose's own papers, gone through after his death, there had come to light a letter 40 years old, in a hand the whole room knew, that had never been meant to be kept. It was an instruction. It named the year. It named the parish. It gave the order, cold and exact, for the page to be taken out, and the loss to be laid to water, and for the young man to be told his wife and child were dead of fever, so that he would grieve and let it lie. And it was signed with the name of the woman who sat now at the head of the family, straight-backed in her black, watching her own decades-old hand read out into the light. Lady Vane Harlowe had believed, for 40 years, that a torn page was a destroyed record. She had not counted on the cathedral, and she had not counted on a dying man keeping her letter, and she had not counted on it mattering ever to anyone. She sat while it was read, and her face, that had not moved through the marriage lines, nor the ring, nor the registrar's oath, moved now. It did not crumple. It was worse than that. It simply emptied, all the long command going out of it at once, and she looked for the first time in the memory of anyone present like what she was, an old woman who had done a wicked thing very young and had it come back for her at the very end. The magistrate turned to Crispin Harlowe. Crispin had come into that room the heir to £9,000 a year and 500 acres and a baronetcy 6 generations old. He stood now and watched his ground go out from under him, one word at a time, and there was nothing in his contempt that could stop it, for contempt is no answer to a book. He was told, in the plain language of the law, what he now was. Not the heir, not the baronet, not the master of anything, the younger, later-born son, with no precedence and no claim, a gentleman of no estate. And the whole room that had jeered a wheelwright in a market a month since turned from him to look again at the man in the working coat, and Crispin's handsome, furious face went from red to white to a still and dawning horror as he understood, at last, exactly whom he had cursed for a beggar, twice, to his face. His brother, his elder, his better-in-law and in blood. He had no words. For once in his life the man had no words at all. Then the room went quiet, and it was the wheelwright's to speak, if he would. Jonah Ashcroft came forward. He had said almost nothing the whole of it. Nothing at the market, nothing to Crispin in the yard, nothing while the men barred his door. He looked at the ring, and the lines, and the great open book, and at the pale old woman at the head of the table, and at his brother Edmund, and last at the magistrate. And he said the one thing he had come to say, and it was not about the land, nor the money, nor the name. My mother kept her name honest, he said. That was all she ever asked of me. That I keep it too. And he said no more. And the scarcity of the words was the whole verdict, and every soul in the room felt it land. The magistrate confirmed it that same hour. The marriage stood. The birth stood. The concealment stood proven, in the architect's own hand, and the estate of Weathermore, and the 500 acres, and the £9,000 a year, and the baronetcy of 6 generations, passed overnight, before the very county that had jeered him, to Jonah Ashcroft Harlowe, wheelwright of Ravensholt-under-Fell, the true and lawful heir, who had been taxed out of a shed for £14 of ground rent by the estate that was his own. 6 months on, it was a soft evening at Weathermore, and the man who owned it all walked out to the coach-house before his supper, as he did most evenings. He had kept his old bench. He had had it carried the 200 miles from Ravensholt and set up in a clean, dry corner of the coach-house, with his grandfather's fellow saw back on the wall above it, and the augers in their rack, all of it recovered from Sowerby's store. He did not need to mend wheels now. He mended them anyway, an hour of an evening, the smell of oak shavings in the great quiet building. So my hands don't forget, he said, when Edmund asked him. A man forgets what he is. He's no use to anybody. 9,000 a year or none. Edmund was at his side yet, and would be, kept on as steward and as brother, the two of them grown close as the months went by, the decent younger son and the elder he had crossed 200 miles to find. Their father's last wish had been to find the boy and clear his name, and Edmund had done both, and slept the better for it. Widow Bree had gone home to Ravensholt with a pension for the rest of her days, in a snug cottage with a warm hearth and a girl to see to her, and she sat by her own fire now and told, to any that would listen, the tale of the wedding in 1838 and the boy she had brought into the world, and how it all came right at the very last 40 years on, because she had kept a memory when they had cut a page. Lady Vane had gone to the dower house at the far edge of the estate, and lived retired there in a disgrace she never spoke of, dry-eyed to the end. And Crispin was gone to lesser lodgings on a small allowance his brother need not have granted him, and did, and he had learned, a thing his father's whole gentle life had never taught him, that a man is not made better than another by the height of his horse. He learned, at last, to mind his betters. Jonah set the traveller to a fresh-turned fellow and sighted down it in the last of the light. Out the wide door the park ran gold to the far trees, 500 acres of it, his by a book, and a ring, and an old woman's memory. He thought, as he often did at this hour, of his mother in her plain grave 30 feet from the church door, and of the things she had said and the things she had never said, and of how she had carried it all in silence rather than shame a man who had been shamed enough. Your father was a better man than the world let him be. He understood it now. He forgave the world a little for it, and his father entirely. For a register does not lie, and a register does not forget. They may cut the page, they cannot cut the copy in the cathedral, nor the memory in an old woman's head, nor the ring in the trunk, nor the honest hand that kept the lines folded in black silk for 40 years. Some truths only lie down and wait. They wait, patient as gold in the dark, for a hand honest enough to open the box and look. Jonah Ashcroft Harlowe blew the shavings from the fellow and set his tools straight for the morning and went in to his supper in the house that had always, all along, been his. If a truth ever waited that long for you, comment the town you're watching from. I'd like to know how far this story has travelled.